When America launches secret military strikes in places like the Caribbean, without evidence made public, without oversight, and without even informing Congress why, the issue becomes far bigger than one isolated decision. It becomes a question of democracy itself. Senator Tim Kaine is not simply nitpicking legal technicalities, he is demanding answers about whether unchecked executive power is eroding the very foundation of the Constitution, and whether these actions are making the country less safe instead of more secure. His warnings are rooted in history, grounded in the present, and aimed at the future of how America decides when and where to use force.
Senator Kaine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just continue the line of, not inquiry, because I don't have a question about this, but I just want to follow up on Senator Slotkin. 25 of us in the Senate wrote a letter to the President a week ago, and we asked questions about these operations in the Caribbean. Give us the evidence that these boats were carrying drugs. Tell us who was on the boats. Tell us what your legal authority was to take a military strike that had not been authorized by Congress. The question that I really want to know is, why did you decide to attack rather than interdict? If you interdict a drug boat, you get evidence. You seize the drugs, but you also get evidence by having access to people, and often it's that evidence that leads you to be able to go after the kingpins and the real, muscle behind these operators. If you attack a boat and destroy it, it makes an impact, but you don't get the evidence. It may actually be counterproductive in fighting narco-trafficking to destroy a boat rather than seize it. And if you know where it is enough to destroy it, you could have seized it. We asked the President to give Congress answers to these questions, which are fundamental questions about an Article I branch's responsibility to be engaged in decisions about military action. We gave the White House 7 days to answer. These are not hard questions. They've not answered. The 7 days expired yesterday. We have no indication that they will answer. And that's likely to lead to a war powers resolution and a required vote in Congress. And sometimes when a vote is required, the administration will begrudgingly provide information. I credit what Senator Wicker said. Each of you have indicated that you will provide information to Congress. But on a basic question as fundamental as should the United States be engaging in military action, putting the lives of our men and women who serve at some risk, the Article II branch shouldn't stiff-arm the Article I branch, and that's what's happening right now. And that's why I'm sure Senator Slotkin and so many other members of the committee are very, very concerned. There might be answers to these questions that would satisfy us. But I can tell you when the questions are not answered, we end up with some real suspicion about why they're not being answered. Mr. Morgan, I want to ask you this question. I know many have asked you questions about sort of the independence of the IG role. The ranking member talked about the administration's decisions to fire IGs right out of the gate has caused folks to have a little bit of concern about this. Assure the committee, assure me that you will be independent and that you will also keep Congress informed, as IGs should, of the work that you're doing.
Senator Kaine, thank you for the question. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you yesterday. I really enjoyed our session. You have my personal pledge to be independent and objective, and the statute itself, the Inspector General Act, provides certain safeguards to ensure the independence of the Inspector General, the ability to initiate an investigation on the own determination of the Inspector General that it's necessary, and also if a secretary determines that an investigation is not warranted and it's not being blocked for national security reasons, the Inspector General can still go ahead with that investigation. So I pledge to you to follow the letter and tenor of the statute.
Thank you for that. One other question. You would be the IG of the largest IG operation in the U.S. government. I guess you kind of compete with HHS, but I think you're probably the largest. And I believe that the complement of employees in the DoD IG is about 1,500. I asked you the question yesterday, how many of those IG employees have accepted the resign offer, and how much is that likely to shrink the workforce of your office?
After I left your office yesterday, I got the answer to that question. So the workforce had a high water mark of 1,800 as a result of the deferred resignation program. It's been reduced by 200.
So down to 1,600.
Yes. And then
Thank you
there
for
have been
that.
some people that have been subject to the layoffs of probationary employees.
Thank you.
I don't have the number for that.
But that's helpful. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to ask you a question for the record because I think it's probably better that it's just not be on the fly. So I'll submit it, but I'll tell you what it's about. The GAO did a report in November of '24 about high-risk training oversight, and they recommended that Special Forces take a number of actions to reduce injuries and even fatalities in high-risk training operations. That was about a year ago, and a number of the recommendations have not yet been implemented. So I'm going to ask a question for the record about what you might do, should you be confirmed, to implement those recommendations so that we can continue to do appropriate training but bring down the risk of injury to our troops in Special Forces. And so I'll submit that for the record to you. Thank you.
The controversy began with reports of U.S. strikes against boats in the Caribbean suspected of drug trafficking. At first glance, the move might look decisive, swift action to eliminate a threat before it reaches American shores. But Kaine raised a critical point: destroying the boats might create a spectacle of strength, yet it simultaneously erases the very evidence needed to dismantle larger networks. By choosing destruction over interdiction, the U.S. government denied itself access to intelligence, prosecutions, and the ability to trace cartels back to their leadership. In other words, what looks like power on the surface could be weakness underneath. If the goal is to defeat drug trafficking organizations, seizing people, gathering documents, and analyzing captured contraband are far more effective in the long run than blowing up vessels on open water. The senator sharpened the dilemma by asking a simple question: if the government knows where a suspected drug boat is enough to destroy it, then why not seize it? The fact that it chose to attack rather than interdict raised alarms. Interdiction not only gets drugs off the market, but also produces valuable evidence. Destroying a boat ensures that evidence is lost forever. Kaine argued this might actually be counterproductive to America's stated goals of fighting trafficking. Instead of helping law enforcement dismantle cartels, it leaves networks untouched and intelligence gaps unfilled. What disturbed him even more was the administration's silence. 25 senators sent a letter to the White House demanding explanations. Who was on those boats? What evidence proved they were carrying drugs? What legal authority justified military strikes without congressional authorization? These were not trick questions nor partisan stunts. They were fundamental queries about the role of Congress, the nature of oversight, and the Constitution's balance of power. The White House had 7 days to respond, the deadline expired, and still no answers. For Kaine and others, that silence spoke volumes. When simple, reasonable questions are ignored, suspicion grows. This is not just about boats in the Caribbean, it is about the balance between Article 1 and Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 1 gives Congress the power to declare war. Article 2 makes the President the commander-in-chief. The design was deliberate. Power would be shared, decisions about war carefully weighed, accountability spread across institutions. Yet when military actions are ordered without informing Congress, that balance collapses. One branch swallows the other, and the careful system of checks and balances begins to look like a facade. History shows where that path leads. Time and again, presidents of both parties have stretched war powers. Vietnam escalated through executive action without a formal declaration. In Libya, airstrikes were launched without congressional approval. In Syria, interventions took place even as lawmakers complained they had been bypassed. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was written specifically to rein in this executive overreach, forcing presidents to seek approval for sustained military action. Yet nearly every president since has treated it as optional, a suggestion rather than binding law. Congress has often lacked the will to enforce its own authority. Kaine's warnings highlight how dangerous this precedent is becoming. If each administration stretches the limits a little further, soon there will be no limits left. The short-term consequences of the Caribbean strikes are worrying enough, but the long-term consequences could be devastating. By burning evidence and silencing oversight, the government risks not only undermining prosecutions but also eroding trust in democratic institutions. Kaine compared the practice to burning the evidence in your own case and then claiming victory. You may have destroyed something in the moment, but you've lost the chance to actually solve the larger problem. The show of force becomes hollow. Instead of dismantling criminal organizations, you merely destroy one boat while leaving the system intact, more shadowy than before. At the heart of this debate lies another institution that Kaine fears is under threat: inspectors general. These watchdogs inside government exist to ensure accountability, root out corruption, and prevent abuse of power. In the Department of Defense alone, thousands of employees work under the Inspector General to monitor operations. Yet in recent years, IGs have been dismissed, replaced, or undermined when their investigations became uncomfortable for the administration. Kaine asked nominees to pledge independence, to promise that they would keep Congress informed and resist political pressure. Without independent watchdogs, accountability collapses, and if the Pentagon itself, with its vast budget and global reach, cannot be held accountable, then the risks are immense. Think about what this means for American service members. Every strike, every order, every mission puts lives at risk. Soldiers and sailors are trained to obey the chain of command, but they also trust that their government has followed the proper process before sending them into harm's way. If decisions are made in secret, without oversight, and without legal clarity, that trust erodes. Men and women in uniform deserve to know that their sacrifice is backed by law, debate, and consensus, not secrecy and executive fiat. This also affects taxpayers. Military actions cost money, often billions of dollars, and those funds are drawn from public revenue. Citizens have the right to know what operations are being conducted in their name and with their money. When administrations sidestep Congress, they are not only bypassing the Constitution, they are spending taxpayer money without transparency or consent. That creates a dangerous cycle of secrecy, spending, and escalation. The erosion of checks and balances has another consequence: secrecy breeds distrust. When 25 senators, representing millions of Americans, are stonewalled, the public begins to assume the worst. If there were clear, justifiable reasons for the strikes, why not share them? Why not show evidence? Why not explain the legal authority? When those explanations never come, suspicion grows that the actions were unjustified, illegal, or reckless. Even if the strikes were legitimate, the refusal to provide answers undermines confidence. A government that asks for trust while withholding information is a government planting seeds of doubt. This is why Kaine's fight is not partisan. He is reminding colleagues and citizens that unchecked executive power has never been limited to one party. It is a pattern, a drift that grows worse with time, and one that threatens the health of democracy itself. When Congress allows itself to be sidelined, it weakens its own role permanently. Power, once surrendered, is rarely reclaimed. The longer lawmakers tolerate silence, the harder it becomes to restore oversight. It is also why debates like this matter far beyond Washington. Citizens often tune out talk of war powers resolutions or Article 4, thinking these are abstract legal debates, but they are not abstract. They decide whether soldiers go to war, whether billions are spent, whether democracy survives. The balance of power between Congress and the President is not a technicality, it is the core of the American system. When that balance tilts too far in one direction, the results have been disastrous: quagmires abroad, secrecy at home, and erosion of trust in institutions. Consider the parallels in history. In Vietnam, secrecy and executive overreach led to years of war without a declaration, tens of thousands of lives lost, and a crisis of confidence in government. In more recent decades, interventions in the Middle East have stretched constitutional limits, leaving Americans questioning why wars drag on without clear authorization. Each time oversight is ignored, the same cycle repeats: action first, justification later, accountability never. Kaine's warnings should be seen in this context, not as isolated complaints, but as part of a long fight to restore constitutional order. The issue of inspectors general ties directly into this. Watchdogs are often the only insiders with the power to challenge abuse. When they are fired, replaced, or silenced, oversight shrinks even further. Without IG independence, Congress has even less information, the public has less transparency, and the executive branch grows more powerful. That is why Kaine pressed nominees to commit to independence. He knows that without IGs, the Pentagon and other agencies risk becoming black boxes, massive institutions moving billions of dollars and deploying thousands of troops with almost no outside scrutiny. This problem compounds when secrecy is justified under the banner of national security. Of course, sensitive information must sometimes be classified, but classification should not become a shield against accountability. When national security is invoked too broadly, it becomes a convenient excuse for hiding mistakes, avoiding scrutiny, and consolidating power. Kaine's insistence that Congress deserves answers is a reminder that secrecy cannot be limitless. If secrecy becomes the rule, democracy becomes the exception. What makes the current situation so troubling is the brazenness of the silence. In the past, administrations at least offered partial explanations or legal justifications, even if contested. Now Kaine says, the White House has simply ignored Congress. That sends a dangerous signal: oversight no longer matters. If that precedent takes hold, future administrations will feel even freer to act unilaterally. And once unilateral power becomes normalized, it is almost impossible to reverse. The danger is not only constitutional, but also strategic. By destroying boats instead of seizing them, the administration may be undermining its own fight against trafficking. Without captured suspects, there are no interrogations, no new leads, no chance to dismantle higher-level operations. Without seized drugs, there is no evidence to bring prosecutions. Short-term shows of force may generate headlines, but they do little to solve the underlying problem. As Kaine argued, interdiction builds cases, destruction erases them. It is like smashing the tip of the iceberg while leaving the bulk untouched beneath the surface. Beyond strategy, there is the principle of accountability. Democracies survive only when leaders can be questioned, challenged, and held to account. When power is exercised in secret, when evidence is withheld, when oversight is ignored, accountability dies, and when accountability dies, mistakes multiply. History shows that unchecked power does not just bend the Constitution, it leads to reckless decisions, costly wars, and unnecessary loss of life. So the debate over these Caribbean strikes is not only about geography or policy, it is about the health of American democracy. Do citizens still believe in checks and balances? Do lawmakers still defend their constitutional authority? Do leaders still value transparency over secrecy? These questions matter because once trust is broken, it is hard to restore. Senator Kaine's voice is one among many, but it carries urgency. He is warning that democracy weakens not in sudden blows but in slow erosion, one strike at a time, one unanswered question at a time, one silenced watchdog at a time. Citizens may not notice immediately, but over years the damage becomes clear: a Congress sidelined, a presidency inflated, and a people left in the dark. That is why these debates should matter to every American, regardless of political leaning. The stakes are not abstract, they involve service members risking their lives, taxpayers funding secret operations, and a constitution designed to prevent exactly this kind of concentration of power. If leaders can act militarily without oversight, if watchdogs can be silenced, if Congress can be ignored, then the very principles of accountability and democracy are weakened. The solution lies not only in Kaine's persistence, but in the public's attention. Power only stays balanced when people demand it. Citizens must care enough to ask questions, to pressure representatives, to insist that secrecy not replace accountability, otherwise the cycle of executive overreach will continue. The Caribbean strikes may seem like a small episode, but in truth they are part of a larger story, one about how democracies drift into imbalance, how oversight erodes, and how liberty is lost, not all at once but piece by piece. If Americans want to preserve their system of government, they must recognize the warning signs. Military strikes without oversight are one of those signs. Silence from the executive branch when Congress demands answers is another. The weakening of watchdogs is yet another. None of these alone destroys democracy, but together they form a pattern of erosion. The challenge now is whether lawmakers and citizens alike will recognize that pattern and act to stop it before it hardens into the new normal. Because once secrecy becomes habit, once oversight is dismissed as optional, once unchecked power is normalized, it rarely reverses. The cost is not only measured in lost constitutional principles, but in lives, dollars, and trust. Kaine's warnings remind us of something profound. Democracy is not self-sustaining. It must be defended, argued for, and preserved every time leaders are tempted to act in the shadows. And so the debate over boats in the Caribbean becomes a mirror, reflecting something much larger. It shows us how fragile checks and balances can be, how easily silence replaces answers, and how quickly oversight can fade. Whether Americans heed that warning may decide not only the future of these specific operations, but the very trajectory of the country's democracy.